woke up one day and said I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. And then we just had this place where we constantly were butting heads. And so I decided to leave.
Just acknowledge that I stopped for you.
Yep. The power of thought and the power of verbal communication gets lost, and thus the message gets watered down, and then you have less buy-in.
It's easy to make assumptions about who you are based on just the image you're presenting today. Unpopular opinion. I know I'm going to get some hate. I'm going to get some hate from this. Hey everybody, welcome to Melding Minds. I am your host, Clarence Abercrombie, and today I am joined by Patrick Hart. He is a husband, father, and air traffic controller. Patrick, what is it like being all three of those things?
Challenging. I guess that's the best word that I could use for it. I always thought of myself as someone that would be able to embrace this, and I think I do through compartmentalization. That's the best way that I can get after being father, husband, air traffic controller. Things have changed a little bit with the air traffic control world because I used to work just in a facility, right? And you'd very much leave your problem set at the door. You'd go in, solve the air traffic problems of the day, whether it's at a scope or in a tower, and then you're done. Like, you kind of solve a puzzle and then move on. When I moved into a heavier leadership role now in the last 16 years, different echelon of thinking, it's like being able to never finish your plate. You're always eating, but there's always still food at the plate, so everything's kind of lingering. So that compartmentalization changed, and the challenging bits are now that it kind of spills into the time with my family. So I guess that's the best way I could word that.
Of those two, which one do you think for quality of life has been better?
From being like a controller at a facility versus where I am now?
Yeah.
It definitely different trains of thought on both, right? I'm more treated like an adult now, for lack of a better term. My schedule is mine. I run very little through my boss and his boss. And so I'm able to take a few more liberties than I would have had if I were at the local level or at the facility level. But as far as feeling like I'm making a true difference on a day-to-day basis, I think the facility level was great. Whether I was in charge of people at the facility level or if I was just controlling traffic, you always kind of had this lay your head on the pillow, feel gratified because somebody somewhere had a problem that you could solve. And it was every day. We called them fires, but it was different. It burned different because it would burn quick and you could take care of it. And you got this sense of like, man, I made a difference today. At the level now, you're setting the theater, you're setting the stage, you're doing a lot of things that have this slow burn. And so there's not always a problem, whether it be human or work, where it's very much like enterprise type level thing. And so you're just slowly slicing at red tape with an X-Acto knife and waiting for the day that problem is solved. I guess so quality of life is different on both sides, but from I go to work and I come home and man, I did a good job today, facility all day. Plus there's like 30 some people there. So whereas now I have 3 in the office. And when you're around 30 people and we talk about connection and we talk about tribes and all these things, like you really get that sense of family from the unit, from the facility.
As you reflect on your career, how long have you been in?
16 years.
16 years. Okay. As you reflect on your military career, what would you say has been the most difficult moment?
I think I have to box this into 2 different answers. One is personal, the other would be professional. We'll go professional first. There was a situation in Kunsan when I was stationed over there, where I was the tower assistant chief controller. And we had a game. It was a game night, right? Everybody comes together. Those short tours, it's kind of the best possible camaraderie system that you'll have. At least I've experienced or been a part of. But you never know who you're going to get and what their comedic likes are like. You never really understand what people are going to introduce. And so there was a racial situation that came up where playing a game, somebody decided to introduce a racial slur into the game, and it completely sucked all the air out of the room. as it should, and it divided the entire facility that quickly. And then we weren't able to really put it back together without a lot of work, right? Like there was a lot, the start of all of the D&I and how do we small group this, and then how do we build up the program to where it makes sense, and how do we make sure everybody's heard. We did a lot of education. We learned a lot about microaggression and things, terms that people weren't familiar with yet. They probably existed in a division somewhere, in a directorate somewhere, but the Air Force was just getting on board, and then here comes this atom bomb of a thing in a facility, and oh, by the way, I'm in charge of finding a way to bring everybody back together in the midst of this crisis. But there's still an operational mission that's super important going on. So that was probably the most challenging professional experience I had.
I just want to ask a question about that specifically. And then, so first of all, I apologize for interrupting.
No, that's good.
But so being around at that time in the Air Force when diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of was being pushed. One, what was that transition like? Because I think that there are a lot of people, I'll say currently, there are a lot of people who look at it and they're like, just let me be an airman, dude.
Yeah.
Like I'm so sick and tired of people telling me X, Y, Z. And at the end of the day, we're all the same. I understand that, right? Just let me do my job and let me get back to the business. What do you say to that?
I would say they're wrong. And it starts with local level leadership. The narrative always gets watered down through each layer that it goes through. I'd say in any organization that happens. There's a book called Tribes that does a really good job at explaining.
I love the book Tribes. Yeah.
It's a quick read, highly suggestible for everybody. Like there's a very specific number. It actually goes into defining why we went with specific numbers for units, for squadrons, for group, all that stuff, where the power of thought and the power of verbal communication gets lost, and thus the message gets watered down, and then you have less buy-in. And so I would say that at the top, something is thought of in a very tribal sense that, hey, this will be carried out this way. But because it starts here and then floods downhill, each organization that gets it first is too big to handle the message appropriately. So by the time it gets down to an actionable place at a unit, it has now lost the essence of what could work. Whereas if you'd started at the unit and then moved the after action report up, then it could have worked because it would be organically defined at a tribal level. So I would say that the messaging gets lost, and that's what happens as to why it doesn't work. To the airman that says, just let me be, this is still a people industry. This is still every industry is realistically customer service based. Like we all rely on one another. We rely on connection, military more than others, in order to survive and thrive. Whether you're in a contingent zone or whether you're just at home station, we could go into the whole resiliency thing, but you need other people. People need other people. In order for, that's not mine. I can't take it to Write Love on Our Arms as a suicide prevention awareness organization. And that's one of their slogans, right? Mm-hmm. But it stands that it's true. And so I would say that the messaging is important, that we all need people to be aware. We need awareness and we need perspective. And in order to do our job, we need people to feel heard. All the way down to simple things. This came out of the professional difficulty or challenge, I would say, was like learning people's first names, right? There was a girl who had a really difficult first name and nobody wanted to say it. So they just always called her by her last name or called her by her nickname or called her by her initials. And that was one of the things that came up was like, if you're not even going to take the time to learn my first name, then how do I know you care about me as a person? And that transcends race. That goes into all walks of life where nobody knew because nobody was taking the time to get to know the individual. So how could they know what was hurting this person without getting to know this person? So the whole push only wants us to be aware of the people around us, regardless of that race, regardless of that sex, that gender, that identity, and wants us all to come together and just get to know one another so we can build trust. So it's good at its core. I would tell that person that get rid of all the slogans and just focus on getting to know one another and do it with care.
I think the important thing is that those individuals don't feel left behind in that process. So one of the things I think that DEI has been doing wrong is that I feel like they have kind of left those guys behind. So just because I don't present a certain way, I'm not black, I'm not a woman, I'm not, I'm not a lesbian or gay or whatever it may be, doesn't mean that I don't also have something useful to offer here. So one of the things I talked about with Colonel Webb in his interview, we were talking about diversity of thought and how that needs to be included in the diversity, equity, inclusion conversation as well. And if we did that we'd get a lot more buy-in.
I agree.
Yeah, solving it is a whole nother, right? Is a whole nother bag of potatoes, right? I think the first thing we have to do, though, is agree conceptually, right? Have people come to a consensus and go, yeah, we think that is where we should move. And then once you get that, then you go, okay, now let's put all those beautiful minds together and figure out how we're going to execute that. But I think you need to have a consensus on what the vision is.
Yeah.
It's why we have mission and vision statements, right? It's to make sure that people understand the direction in which they're going because it informs action.
Yep.
Where'd you grow up, man?
Hampton, Virginia. More specifically, Yorktown, Virginia. But I was born at Langley Air Force Base, on the base. My dad was retired way before I was born, but he was in Vietnam War, so that's why we just kind of stayed around that area anyways. But yeah, grew up in Yorktown, that was my first duty assignment too, and my second, if you consider the PCA across the street to ACC. So 26 years before I really left. So,
wow.
Yeah.
26 years. So you have been around the Air Force your entire life.
Yes. Yeah. It's a a densely populated area. There's seven bases, different services, right, within 20 miles. So there's a lot of traffic, but there's a huge military presence.
How did growing up in that environment, having a dad who was prior Air Force, how did that inform your decision to join?
Initially I didn't want to. It was not on the forefront of my brain to join the military in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I went through a huge punk rock phase. My brother had gotten me into that, and it really had taken I'm not going to join the man, right? But that's just a very youthful way of looking at the world. So I kind of got out of that, and it went down a path of wanted to be in a band, was trying to play in a band. Band broke apart. I was living with a friend at the time. I'd moved out of my house when I was relatively young, I guess 16, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. His father actually was a pilot and retired as well, officer in the Air Force, and he had come into the room and was like, both of you are going right now to take your ASVAB score. You're going to the recruiter's office, and if you don't, you're not going to have a place to live. I already done that. The reason I was in their house is because I was sleeping in an abandoned home, and I came to join them. Their mother was amazing, and let me in. So not unpacking too much this early, that was just an opportunity for me to take control of my life. Come to find out, I had a lower ASVAB score than my friend, Will, but he had too many tickets, so they weren't taking him just because of all the, recruitment barriers to entry. And so I had already taken it, I had already gone a step too far, so I may as well finish this thing out. So I went ahead with the first enlistment. I went into air traffic very deliberately. I had a family friend, Charlie Baker, who was a controller at Norfolk. He was prior military and was like, this is the only job you want. So it's interesting because it's not my father that actually got me into wanting to join the military. He had never really pushed it. He didn't really talk too much about his experiences. Most people from Vietnam, that's a trend. But my brother, half-brother, however we look at that, we'll get into that another time. He was in the Army. And he was the one that was like, go in the Air Force. You need to go in the Air Force. Do not join any other service. And when I talked to him about tossing around the idea of joining or going to California to audition for yet another band, he made it very clear that that was the right move, was to join. So I would say it was more of a push from Will's father and from my half-brother.
That's funny, man. My stepfather was in the Army. I grew up as an Army brat. And when I told him I was thinking of joining the military, he was like, join the Air Force. It seems like every Army person is like, join the Air Force.
Yeah. Yep. You never hear that from a Marine, though. Marines, it's like, join the Marines.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pride thing.
Yep.
Right? But I think that's funny.
It's challenging. I know military is defining both of us in a lot of ways, and in a lot of ways it doesn't.
Yeah.
But this has been like a recent topic for me and Bridget, my spouse. We've talked about heritage a lot. And like Marines, they haven't changed their heritage at all, realistically, since like they just don't. And so they always have the pride of once a Marine, always a Marine, join the Marines. And that's why they keep people is usually through that motto. The Army, on the other hand, you look at the way that they move out, they train, like you don't really join with an MOS or with a career field in mind, and then you all pick up and you move together. And the Air Force is so individualistic. You join with a career, you then train stovepiped in that career, and a lot of people have done that for 18 plus years, and now we're starting to adapt to the mindset of how the Army deploys and how the rest of the services do things. And we're in this huge tumultuous change to say, are we moving in the right direction, or are we losing our identity as an Air Force? Is this going to help recruitment? Like, where's our heritage? Because we've moved away, whether you refer to as relaxing standards or just evolving, we have definitely changed from we are a collective to we are individuals that happen to be in the same location for the same reason. And a lot of people don't have the same pride they had like back after 9/11. And so we're in a very challenging environment as we look a few years in the future, as I would say an Air Force versus a Marine Corps.
I want to go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that you were living in abandoned houses.
Yeah.
How did we get there?
We talked about rebellion earlier. I grew up, mother was doing her absolute best, right? Single mom. My father ended up living in North Carolina. They split really before I was born, which was surprising. My sister found that information in a closet one day. But they were divorced before I was born, so he lived in North Carolina. We got to see him on occasion. Loved my dad to death, but he didn't really get to play a huge role in our lives, right? And my mom was a nurse, and so she worked crazy hours, lots of babysitters, lots of, back in the day, you stayed out till the street lights were on, that sort of thing. But she was big into, like, you have to be the best. Like, you're not going to make it out unless you're the best. And sometimes the ways that she got after that, I think, were probably not the ways that we discipline kids nowadays, right? So I didn't like that very much, accepted it for a long time, and then woke up one day and said I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. And then we just had this place where we constantly were butting heads, and so I decided to leave. But it's funny, I go back to this all the time, like, I think about how I was raised and how, like, I challenged that idea of, like, maybe the quick slap to the face or whatever as an adjustment for a kid. But that idea of focusing on achievement, of always having to be the best, is probably the reason I continued to go to school while I was in an abandoned house. I was rebelling against how she was raising me, but the core elements of what she instilled in me were there. And I worked 2 jobs, or Papa John's S&K Suits, and I would take shower or sink, like showers in the sink, right? I'd go to school. Like, I would do everything I needed to do to finish to get my degree. Yet I still had no plans at that point to do anything with it. I knew I loved playing music, but I kept doing it. I kept doing the things that I knew I was told my entire life were important. So there's a weird dichotomy there. Like, I always had this ability to just be independent and say, like, screw this, I'm moving on, man. Like, and that's what I did. I felt like I needed to get myself out of an environment, but I was still doing what was right. Probably not by my own thoughts, but by her thoughts. And it probably gave me my best chance for success.
It sounds like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like while you were living in that space, that you were very focused, and in some ways it wasn't difficult for you. Or is that incorrect?
No, yeah, it wasn't. It was just a different place to wake up. Like,
Yeah.
so the way it happened is I had a buddy who his dad was very well off. And by proxy, they were well off. And they owned several houses. And I happened to play music with this individual. And he had told me that it was okay to stay there because nobody was living in it and they were going to renovate it. And it was still, relatively within walking distance or driving distance to the school. So, okay, that works for me. So then I just packed up and I went. And then I just did that for probably a few weeks before I tried to go back home. Didn't work out. So, return, repeat, rinse, repeat. I did that for about a month, and then it was getting cold. So, because there's no heat in the house, no electricity, there's no anything. So I went to Will, who was an old family friend since second grade, and I love that family to death. When I knocked on the door, I asked for a sleeping bag. That was what I did. I hadn't talked to this dude in a while because we had a falling out. And he was like, yeah, hold on a second. And he went in and immediately got his mom. And his mom came and talked to me, and she was like, no, you're just going to sleep here from now on. And never made me change my ways in the sense of like, we need to have an intervention. We need to bring your mom over. We need to do all this thing. Like, none of that. It was a midnight phone call I imagine she had with my mom where she said, this is the best place for him and we're going to take care of him. And then it was an understanding. I got to finish out high school there and it was great. But at no point did I say like, oh, I need to, I got to just, I don't know, I got to move, or I need to go back and just kind of like tuck my tail between my legs. Like, it was very much no, I made this decision. Now I'm going to live with it. It is, I'm just going to keep moving forward. Yeah.
What's your relationship with your mom today?
We speak infrequently at best. I would say when we talk, we're very friendly. My mom likes to give a lot of advice. And I don't think I'm still at a point where I take a lot of her advice because of the fragmented relationship we had during those years. So, yeah, I would say we're friends, but we don't speak as often as we probably should.
Sounds like that's different from your dad.
Yeah, well, father's situation is way different because he has dementia. He's got Agent Orange. Oh, wow. He's had a couple of situations in the last year where he was almost moved to hospice care. He's not really great at Facebook. He's moved out of his house to a place where not a care facility, but where he's in basically the basement of a friend's house. So he's got somebody that's observing him. But I mean, the time there is ticking. The dude's been hospitalized throughout my Air Force career 3 separate times where the doctors came out and said, like, you need to start planning the funeral. This is going to happen. Like, wow. It's going to happen. The first time it killed me, right? And this is kind of where I learned to deal with grief, I think. Because the first time up here is where it happens. Like, everything starts here. I buried him in my mind because I had to sit there and watch as, like, they put stents in his heart, they put stents in his kidneys, there's blood constantly in the bags. I can't say thank you enough to my supervision because those guys at the time just let me live in the hospital. So for weeks I lived in the hospital. He had this thing down his throat, the breathing tube down his throat, which he ended up ripping out in the middle of the night. And when he did come to, he was constantly getting aggressive with the nurses to where they had to handcuff him down to the bed. It was just a really, like, I don't like using the word traumatic. Again, it goes back to how we perceive things. Mm-hmm. Trauma isn't something that happens to you. It's how you decide to perceive it. So it was a very challenging thing that had happened and to watch and witness. And in that mind, when the doctor pulled me out, it was like, this is it. You need to start making your accommodations, or you need to start making I forget what words he used, but essentially saying arrangements. Thank you. I was like, okay. And then I had to make a decision through the emotions, like, okay, he's gone. But then he ended up having a pulmonary embolism. They medevaced him to another local hospital because they couldn't do the work at Langley, and they saved him there. And he spent another week in the hospital and then came out. And I was like, holy crap. And this is a dude that in Vietnam fell out of a helicopter and was in a full body cast for a year, was told he's never going to walk again. He's 82 now, and he still walks. Like, he should not be alive, right? This goes into a deeper thing. Anyways, so there's that was the moment that for me, I was like, he's dead. And I just kind of put the shovel to the ground in my head. Then we have another instance where he fell. He had his head outside of the car, like by my sister's house. He was taken to the hospital again. Same conversation. Like, your dad's going to go to hospice. He's not going to recover from this. We need to do a whole bunch of surgeries. He had all these polyps inside of his belly. And it was like, I didn't process it the same way. I didn't process it as if my dad was dying, because I had already, this sounds so messed up, but it's true. In my brain, I had to compartmentalize it as if he were dead. But every time that something bad happened, I found myself calling him less, because I had made a decision in my mind that this had happened. And this is the best way to keep distance from how I felt that day versus how I'm going to feel when it really happens. And then 2 months ago was a rush to the hospital. They found him. Like the guys that live above him had come back and they saw he was on the floor, just on the floor, and he went to the hospital. And I got a call from my sister saying like, this is it for sure. So that was the third time. And I was like, okay, I got to go home. I got to get tickets. I got to buy tickets and go home. He never went to hospice, still alive. Again, the point is, I don't know what this dude is on. I don't know how my dad survives, but if there is a inherited strength that I find in the trying to tie it back together to just keep moving forward, like regardless of the decisions I make or whatever environmentally impacts me, I think it probably comes from him, because he shouldn't be walking. He shouldn't be alive. He shouldn't have gone and recovered through all these things. And I don't feel like a great son for how I've had to deal with it in order to get to a place where I'm not going to just defeat myself when he does die. But it's what I had to do then in order to, I guess, survive the emotional part of it through now.
How do you think that informs how you look at your family? Because I would think that would make you a family man, like hardcore.
Yeah, it does. But not hardcore in the sense that I don't have aspirations still. Like, I've found the perfect partner, right? Like, and it's crazy. We kind of talked about it before. I don't know if it makes it on this or not, but you find someone when you're not looking for them. Like when I had gotten out of a 5-year-long relationship before I went to Korea, and I was in a 5-year-long relationship before that. And Korea's short tour, and everybody makes their jokes about how, like, oh, you're going to find a spouse out there. You'll probably find somebody out there. Went in there just full mindset of, like, I'm going to date. I'm just going to date. I'm going to go out and have fun. Like, I've been tied down for 10 years, essentially. This is going to be great. And I ended up meeting Bridget, who is also a controller, and she's my wife, 7 years, almost 8 now. And we just hit it off, but we decided we weren't going to do anything because she had a similar situation. So everything was very friendly, right? We were seeing other people, but we were still friends. We kept coming back to one another, and I was like, wow, you can be friends with a girl. That's awesome. Because in my mind, I always said, and I said it out loud, like, you can't be friends with someone of the opposite sex. It always goes, somebody eventually has some event in their life where it goes down that path, right? Mm-hmm. And I stand by the stance now because she's my wife. Like, at some point, we had to make that decision, and we made it together. And then we ended up getting married, and yes, we had only been dating at the time for like a couple of months, and it's one of the best decisions I made. I have to say that she has massive aspirations, just like I do in the Air Force. But I hope, and I hope other people see it this way too, that they all come from a good place. Nothing comes from like I need to be the guy on top of the mountain, or she needs to be the girl on top of the mountain. I don't care about position. Like, influence is just something you naturally have on other people. It's about controlling that influence and knowing that you can help people do good things for the betterment of the world. And I think we both kind of see it that way in our own ways. So we were both driven, and we're together. Now you throw Dexter in the mix, right? My son. And we're like, so to the point about being a family man, I always wanted kids. I remember 5th grade, I wrote a paper about wanting to, like, what do you want to do? You know, fireman, I want to be an astronaut. Like I said, I wanted to be a father. Like, that's, if anything to tell you about how my relationship with my parents was as a kid, like that should tell you it. It's not, I want to be a father because I feel like I'm being raised great. And they did the absolute best they could. It was, I wanted to be a father because I want to do things my way. That was already my thinking at 5th grade, right? So we have Dexter, and I didn't know how challenging it was going to be. I thought that it was just going to be easy because in my mind, I'd always wanted kids, because you always want it. It should be perfect when it happens, right? Anyways, I didn't connect to him for like 12 months. Like, I went through the motions, and it was insanely difficult for me to process because I'm still working really hard because it's just who I am. Still doing my best to take care of my wife, and then she in turn wants to take care of me. But then I've got this skin sack of a son that's trying to learn to walk and move, and I'm doing the right things because the books say they're right and my friends say they're right, but I'm not feeling like it's right. And that was probably the hardest thing to cope with because I thought I was going to be like that forever. And then I deployed for 6 months. And I say deployed because I went to absent rear. So it was really to not anywhere that you would have a difficult time. But I learned a lot. Anyways, being away is being away. So I was gone for 6 months. And in that time, watching him grow up on camera really changed my perspective. So I'm answering your question with a long ass story because I tend to do that. But I was thinking that I was going to be this driven family man, and then I wasn't. And I started to pack more of my life away into work. 3 a.m. I was getting up to go to the gym. 4:30, 5 a.m. I was at work. Bridget was taking the brunt of taking care of Dexter. This is before the deployment, right? And then I would go home. I would pull my shifts. I would do all the right things. It's not like I was not a part of their life. But I was definitely spending a lot more time at work, threw myself into it. Then I had to watch him grow up on a camera, and it changed my outlook. And when I got home, because I had missed his first steps, he was walking, and like he could talk a little bit. He could kick a soccer ball, like a little one. And that interaction changed everything. Me being able to interact with him in a way that I felt like we could bond. Now I am very much a family man. I leave work when I want to leave work. And I mean, work always gets done, but I'm not going to feel guilty about leaving work at 4 to go pick up my son. Nobody's going to make me feel guilty about that. That change didn't happen until I got back from that deployment. If I had just continued, I think without that distance, I don't know if it ever would have happened. Like, I have to look at that as a bit of a godsend.
Why?
Okay, I guess I can't say that it wouldn't have happened because I don't have a parallel universe to go jump in and live it. But
yeah, that's not a judgment question.
Yeah.
I'm asking, what about the distance? Because you said, hey, I watched him kind of grow up via video. Is it that you felt like you missed out and you were seeing that you were missing out? Was it purely the fact that he kind of leapfrogged in time for you? What was the thing?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I hate to say that you answered it for me, but it might just be the best answer right now. That click moment. Do you remember the movie Click with Adam Sandler?
Oh, you're talking about the one he could fast forward and yeah.
With the remote.
Yeah.
That was probably right. Like the jump from him being like this big to then, being like this and walking, like just because so much happens, and that it was from his 8 months. Yeah, I left when he was 8 months old. So 8 months and then 6 months later, right? Like he just changed so much in that time. Yeah, that fast forward and realizing like, I missed all of this. Like that I couldn't. But I do think that there's a lot. I read a lot. I tried to start a couple of groups on like bonding as dudes because we tend to not focus on non-connection with our kids. It's apparently a very common thing that guys go through with their children at a young age. They don't want to put it into the same category as like postpartum or anything, but connection is really hard until an engagement happens. And a lot of times we're so focused on, okay, you got to try to nurture the wife a little bit because she went through this huge experience, this miraculous experience. So you got to play your part correctly. And then you still got to go to work. And then really all you're doing is changing diapers, and that's not engagement. There's nothing bonding about that. And there's studies that show that men, when their levels of dopamine and all of the bonding neurons, like all of that stuff happens when you play with your kid. Like whether guy or girl, doesn't matter, son or daughter, whether you're wrestling, when you're engaged in some sort of physical activity. And I don't think he was old enough at 6 months to do what I could do wrestling wise with him when he's 14 months. And I think maybe if I had just endured for that time, it probably would have been the same outcome. But for me, it gave me a lot of reflection. It gave me a lot of like, you're not here and you want to be there. Whereas if I had always been a part of the daily churn, I don't know if I would have had that same reflective moment. It just would have been, aha, someday. Same outcome, but I would be less able to talk about it.
Yeah.
It just would have happened.
The likelihood that you would have bonded with your son is still extremely high.
Yeah.
But I don't know if the likelihood of you going, I'm leaving to go pick up my son and you're not going to make me feel bad about it. I don't know if that would have happened. I think that realizing that you're missing things, that you're missing out, that life is happening without you, is something that gives you pause and makes you go, you know what, I need to think about what's important in my life. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about lots of things in your past, right? I would argue that, and I know I experienced this myself as well, that when people look at you, especially in your uniform, you got your stripes on, right? You're looking good, that people wouldn't see. They don't see your past, right? So it's easy to make assumptions about who you are based on just the image you're presenting today, and not the fact that you are really a culmination of all of those experiences that happened in your life. With that being said, what do you really want people to understand about you? If you could let somebody know something about you and you could hold it, you could have a sign plastered above your head with this thing as you walked around, what would it be?
I think it would say, ask me how I am 3 times. Now, that's not my originality, right? There's the study that says you have to ask somebody how they're doing 3 times before they're willing to show you or break down a little bit, because they have to feel like you care enough to answer the question. But trying to be strong and give off this brand of strength for so long has, we talked about like brother, half brother, like there's, Mike was I call him my brother because he had red hair just like me. He was adopted into a family that my mom had known the woman for a very long time, and they couldn't have kids. So we ended up like we were always together, right? And every time we went out, it was always, oh, look at your 2 sons, look at your 2 sons. So I grew up thinking that this was my brother, realistically. Like that's how we spent all of our time. And Mike ended up taking his own life after he got out of the Army. So I say that not to drop a bomb, but because there was all of these clues when he got out that he wasn't acclimating very well. And like asking him how he was doing while being so wrapped up in how busy my life wasn't really a priority then, right? And when I had to go through that time when we lost him, and you lose somebody that's really close to you, even though we had been fragmented since the time that he became an adult and joined the Army, and you just lose touch with people a little bit. You don't really start to think about maybe how you feel until you get to the same age. So for me, when I started to get close to his age when he went through with this, I started to think about like, wow, I've outlived this guy, right? And then I started to notice little things about myself where I would be, whether it's withdrawn, but I would withdraw into the bathroom at the gym, or I would withdraw into, I'm not going to say a closet at work, but I'll go bathroom again at work. Like if I found a space where there was a little bit of shadow that I could just take a breath for a second, I would do that. I always tried to be balanced in the way that I talk to people, passionate about the things I'm passionate about. But when I go home, I say this to Bridget all the time, like, you're the only one that knows the real me. And it's funny, but not funny, because sometimes the real me is, it's 5 p.m., I got home, and I'm just on the couch staring at the ceiling. And I guarantee that this is the first time, if anybody watches this and knows me, has ever thought like, no, that doesn't make sense, right? If you were to read, I write, or I've written 2 books for their poetry books, and Instagram is a huge place for me. You would read the words, you'd be like, this is dark, man. Like, there's no way, this must be a moniker, this must be a brand. Like, that's a very real, that's the yang, that's the very real dark side of how I feel, and I think it might be genetic, and there's nothing I can do but write about it, because if I talk about it, then I'm afraid people might look at me differently, or they might see me as less strong or less capable. Capable is probably the right word, right? Strength is an appearance. Strength is endurance. Capability is forecasted. So if somebody looks at me and says, oh, I wish you hadn't let me in on that. Now I don't know if you'll be able to do XYZ at this moment in the future. That's what I'm afraid of. That's why I don't talk about it. So if I had to put something above my head that says, ask me how I'm doing 3 times, like, I might let you in. I might not just give you a hug and flip the script real quick on you and ask you about your weekend. Because we as in anybody that feels this way gets real good at turning around the narrative. So let's talk about you. This is uncomfortable for me. I love talking about myself, but I always have a venue without the cameras and the microphone to easily turn it back on you. It's why I can be looked at least from my social circle, the people that know me, as like, he always makes me feel special. That's because I don't want you to talk about me. I want to talk about you, because then I can easily focus in on your problems and I don't have to talk about mine.
Wow.
And yeah, that would be, if there's anyone doesn't know about me, it's probably that.
Couple things there. The first one is, I didn't know you wrote poetry. I actually write poetry as well.
Nice.
Yeah. I put my stuff on Instagram as well.
Okay. I'm going to have to follow each other.
What's your Instagram?
Work in Progress 13.
Work in Progress 13.
Yep.
Okay. Mine is Wordsmith. Like words and myth together.
Okay. MYTH.
Yeah.
Okay. Sick. I'll do it.
But yeah, no, I'll look at your stuff, man. I feel like poetry sometimes is the only way to clearly get some thoughts out of my head. Would you agree with that?
I agree. Yep.
Yeah. I think that the deflection thing is interesting, because I would argue that most people who know you, at least professionally, look at you and go, sharp airman, this guy leading the pack, has got his whole life together, never has any problems, never has had any problems. And I think that people would assume that you think deeply, because you come across as that kind of a guy. But I don't know if people would believe that you've gone through as much as you've gone through, first of all. And I don't know if people understand how, and I think this is just a thing for men in general, how lonely it can be as a man.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to talk about that a little bit?
We are breaking, it's not stigmas, but we're talking about things, I think, as a society a lot more now. The evolution of podcasts, of YouTube, of Instagram, of all social media of all types means that we now have a vessel, direct to consumer, of our thoughts, right? So if this is a bit different. My dad's like, anything that you can say or think has been said or thought before. Like, that's a bit sad to put it that way, but there's an element of truth to that in the fact that we are now finally engaging on these topics. So I have seen an increase in social media outpouring, I guess, for like the strong dad. And I don't ever want that to be contradictory to the fact that like this should like supersede a strong woman. Like there shouldn't be the man-woman argument, but as far as a man, I think the perception of how you're supposed to act in the world right now, since we're still kind of tweaking social gender norms, it's still very heavy on the man shouldn't really talk about his problems. The man should still, in a lot of ways, provide. The man should still like carry their burdens and just do it in a silent way. And I do think that societal perception is still there. Like, we are changing it. That stuff is changing. Boys Get Sad Too. It's a great organization out of the UK. Like, everybody's trying to raise awareness and talk more about it. But I think every person just, reversion to the mean. Like, we kind of go back to what history has said we're supposed to do. So, yeah.
There's one more thing I want to key in on that you said. I've been a part of a lot of unsuccessful relationships. But I've interviewed people who have been quite successful in relationships. And one of the things that tends to keep coming up is my partner is my best friend. No one really knows me except my partner. Those are two things that keep coming up for people who figured it out. And I want to kind of dig into that a little bit with you, because I think that lots of us live with masks. As a minority, right? I have a mask that I felt like I had to put on. I don't know if I had to, but that I felt like I had to put on in professional spaces. As a man, you have a mask that you feel like you need to put on in professional spaces. As a husband, right? A lot of people feel like they have to put on a mask to be able to exist in their own relationships. Being able to go home and take all of them off. I don't think as many people as you'd like to think have that. What was it like? Because I'm assuming at some point you had to expose yourself completely to your partner. And as you said, being vulnerable is uncomfortable, right? This is uncomfortable to some degree, right? But being vulnerable to your partner in that way, letting them know all of it. What was that like?
So everybody's story is a little bit different.
Yeah.
I had gone through an attempt that I'm not proud of that left some very noticeable scars, right? Mm-hmm. During my time outside of into Korea, where I decided to, I'm going to date around. I had to then get comfortable embracing the fact that those things aren't going away. And so when my wife and I became a collective and had to have that conversation, it was a decision point to either let that topic drive into very deeper topics or just try and brush over it and move on. I think if I had gone with the latter and brush over it and move on, then I wouldn't really be giving the time to the thing that I wanted to grow. So I had to do the other, which was just be vulnerable and explain everything, right? And one thing I love about Bridget is she always asks questions. So she can be awkward sometimes and not ask questions, and I find that super endearing, but she asks prodding questions and she gives me the space to keep talking about the things. And it's super important when, like, I don't want to relate it back to a podcast, but like you interview people and you have to give them the space to tell their stories. The levels of active listening, you can't just jump in and immediately say like, oh, I have a thought. I need to say it now. Like you have to wait for them to finish. And she does that. And so when you're talking about difficult things, the second part of giving someone the space to listen, what she does is then believe the words coming out of my mouth and not say like, that doesn't fit you. That's probably not accurate. Or like judgment's fine. I honestly don't have a problem with people judging people. I have a problem with you like choosing your actions based on that judgment. Like I might judge you for the shirt you're wearing. Doesn't mean I'm going to treat you different, right? As a very generalized example. Mm-hmm. Like I never felt the judgment, but I also felt like she believed me when I told her things that I was saying, that I had experienced. And then that helped with communication. So if I had to really find like how was I able to be vulnerable in that space with her at that time, and why did I keep making the decision to say yes to get more vulnerable, it would be because she possessed those qualities during conversation.
She created the space for you. She made it safe for you.
Yeah. And if you talk to her, she would say she's not good at doing that. And it's true, she gets a little bit blush when she feels uncomfortable. She doesn't consider herself a great communicator, but she is, and she was during those moments where, for me, I'm relying on her to make it comfortable, because if it wasn't, I could have easily just hightailed away, put up a wall, and there goes 7 years. Who knows what would have happened?
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy how different your life could be, right, when you reflect on that.
Yeah.
It sounds like, as a community, right, that we need to do a better job of taking care of each other. To that point, what should we be doing, man? What's a difficult conversation that we should be having that we're not having?
That's tough. I think we're not developing awareness or education on a fundamental level that goes beyond history, math, science. Like, you need to learn these things in life skills. Okay, the answer is life skills, but it goes to like parents and relationships and the school system. We learned the fundamentals of what can get you to the next test, what then can get you to the next test, again, gets you the SATs, all that sort of stuff. What we're not doing is paying attention to the higher suicide rates, the higher resiliency or lack thereof rates, and how can we perform not preventative maintenance, but proactive to stop the things that are happening. And we do that by teaching people at an early age things like finances, right? How they can better take care of their finances, their emotional state. Why do you respond the way you respond? Like, we, for some reason, stop that when kids get into first grade, right? We're like, oh, your child is either a part of the world now, or they're going to take this other track because they're developmentally challenged in some way. And then we'll take the long road. Like, that's kind of the two trails now. And we lose focus on the, here's who you are, and not the hippy dippy shit that's like you need to light a candle and sit in a circle together. Like, this is your brain works this way. This is why you are acting the way you are, and this is how you can respond to it differently. And we don't do that in grade school. What we do is we develop a human being to test out of high school, go to college, and then they enter the real world, and we're like, by the way, you need to act this way, and you also need to not have these thoughts. And if you do have these thoughts, go talk to a therapist. Therapist's going to cost you a couple $1,000s, but you need to pay for it. There's your 1, 2, 3. And we're like, whoa, what if you had prepared me for this when I was younger? So I guess my request would be, like, in some way, shape, or form, parents, probably, you got to be a good person to be a good parent. So you'd have to focus on this stuff yourself, but learning to not stop talking about like resiliency and whatnot with your kids when they're 1, 2, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, like when you start entering those phases of life. Don't just discount it and make it all about like school and sports and moving on, because it's challenging. Like, I would say that we're not doing a good job there.
Yes. Life skills.
Yeah.
You've talked on a lot of things. Finances is a big one, right? So there are a lot of people who have committed suicide because of financial issues. Yep. There's an argument to be made that maybe if you had taught them some financial responsibility earlier, that maybe you could have prevented that thing from happening because they would have known how to manage that. I haven't seen anyone teach how to balance. I don't want to say a checkbook because people don't use checkbooks anymore.
You don't need that.
Yeah, but even just creating an Excel sheet with just breaking out your finances, and that is a useful skill to have. Yep. And I think the earlier you start teaching that, the better. But it's not something we do. When I was in school, we had wood shop, we had auto shop, right? Yep. Which was another thing. Like, I know how to change a tire, I know how to change my oil.
You had home ec.
Yeah, 100%, right?
PT for the physical pillar.
Yeah.
Resiliency.
A lot of that stuff has kind of gone away.
Gone. Because what we do is we're doing the same thing in the military. Like, we take these DOCs or these surveys, we listen to people, and we're like, we want to listen to our customer. Okay, that makes sense. Baseline, that makes sense. Customer's like, I don't like doing these tedious things because it annoys me. Well, why does it annoy you? It annoys me because and then that's where it gets challenging, because their internal monologue is, it annoys me because it makes me vulnerable, it makes me think, it makes me sweat in the middle of the day, and we lose sight of this is the good that comes out of it. Instead, it's like, well, let's just coddle the customer, and then hopefully they'll stop complaining. Like, I don't want to muzzle. I want to tell you what is good for you because research backs it up. You need to sweat because it helps with the endorphins and it helps you cope in general. You need to do some sort of physical fitness. And we had it in elementary school and middle school, and then it became an elective. Mm-hmm. And I was so confused by it. how you properly reflect. We write poetry. Journaling has become a hippy dippy new age thing, but it's not. It's a very real thing that goes, predates television. People journal. You journal because you can reflect on your day and you get a new perspective for how the person that you had an interaction with may have perceived how you came off, or maybe you think about how they came off. And that gives you the ability to react different in the future. Those are the skills that we don't teach home ec, like where they might have learned how to do basic necessity care. We got rid of that. And you go all the way back to, if I tie it back to the military, like we dropped from the enlisted side, we dropped how to counsel, we dropped how to write performance reports. All of that was dropped over the last 8 years from PME, right? For ALS, NCOA, senior NCOA.
PME?
Yep, professional military education.
What is that?
It's when in the military, different stages of rank, you have to go to a formal class. And in this course, it's a curriculum because you do get credits towards your college degree, right? Your community college and the Air Force degree, but you do get credits. And so those credits have to be tied to something, which is the curriculum. So they started focusing more on theory and I'll just say on theory. And we got rid of the military part of PME where you have to write a performance report. So then you put this new supervisor into the field and they have a member that has suicidal ideations. And because they were never taught how to counsel, they never noticed any of the flags and they don't know what to do. And now you've got a master that is also busy or senior that's busy. And they're like, okay, I do have to drop what I'm doing to help this situation. But now their life becomes more complicated. So the second and third order effects weren't considered because they wanted to coddle to the customer, right? Now it's back. We have the reform standards, like return standards. And now we're back to doing performance reports in PME. We're back to doing counseling sessions in PME. But they got rid of it for so long. There was a gap. There's a skill gap that happened. The same thing is happening or happened in education K through 12. We got rid of the foundational elements of how to be a successful human being instead of just jack of all trades when it comes to knowledge. So that's a huge concern.
Understand the military argument on that. Take me to the human element of this. The thing that, hey, I'm somebody, I don't understand the military, dude. How do I connect with that?
I guess I would ask you to walk around your high schools and middle schools, changing landscape, social media becoming a thing, right? You now have graduated students becoming parents somewhere in this generation where social media was part of their backbone. And their dopamine hits come from when they scroll. They weren't really taught, other than my generation and slightly older than me, saying, get off your phone, get off your phone. So they weren't really taught any coping mechanisms. So now their kids start experiencing difficulties, right? Like resiliency. So we'll go back to the foundational human things that I think that they should be teaching. The finances that then helps them later on in life. Mm-hmm. The resiliency and how to cope with bullying. Rather than just saying bullying is bad, how do you deal with it? Like, we got rid of those types of discussions in K through 12. I think it was because parents said, I should be teaching that at home. You shouldn't be teaching it. But then it went to the home and they were ill-equipped to teach it because the generation, mine and slightly before me, that said, I want to teach this at home, now progressed into grandparents. And so the parents never learned how to do it at home. So then we're looking back at the school system as, well, why are things going wrong? It's because I don't have the skills to teach you how to do it right. Mm-hmm. And so now it's the blind leading the blind, and everybody's hurting all of the time. And you're lucky if you get out. Like, I think that's where we've gone. And we need just a straight reset. We need a reset to teach people the human skills, the life skills. Like, it would be crazy if there was just a class, an elective, if you will, for like 45 minutes that was guided discussions. Like, your phones are left at the door and you're forced to communicate with each other about difficult topics. Like, I know it seems like why would we put that in school? But we demand that from people when they get out of school. Why are we not doing it? We're telling kids like, oh, go join debate club. Go to become a public speaker, you have to be better at public speaking. Not every job requires you to public speak. Like I get there's a dichotomy on it, but there's a confidence that comes from it. There's an ability to handle yourself that comes from it. Why is that not an opportunity in school? So when I say life skills and the human element, if I'm getting away from military, we're not helping young kids become well-equipped adults. And then that's only going to trickle down. And you're going to have a whole other generation that can't do it.
I think that lends itself to a different question, which is, what is the purpose of a school? Right? Because I think today, at least in American society, I can't speak for anyone else around the world, but I think in American society, our schools are designed to prepare you for college.
Yes, 100%.
Right? So they're not designed to prepare you for life. And if that's the direction that we need to be going in, and I would argue that it is, then I think we have to fundamentally change how we do education.
Concur. Yeah, because it's an unfair argument for me to sit here and say like, oh, teachers who already don't get paid enough should have to embrace this burden as well, right? Like, I don't mean to come off that way. I wouldn't say like, we should just keep paying them the same and put this on their back. Like, absolutely not. A true overhaul of the education system is required for this. If you're going to require a kid to spend 8 to 10 hours at school and then turn around and have to have 2 to 3 hours of homework a night. If your idea of education, not yours, but the society's, the Western civilization is 13 hours of work a day, 5 days a week, then you have to pack some sort of human element into that, some sort of upbringing education that isn't just a school book or a textbook, because that's where they're spending the majority of their time. So, I mean, should we go to 4-day work weeks and then parents have a day that, like an additional day? I mean, yes, I would argue that we should. We'd have to find a state willing to embrace that and use that as like, they're going to build it. They're going to figure it out, I guess. Or you start mental health. You don't just have a guidance counselor. Mental health is a part of your curriculum, and that's where you cover these things. And you put your money where your mouth is if we're going to say that this is an epidemic and it's something that we need to tackle. And I would argue the military needs to do the same, right? Like, they're always saying that they're working on it. There's a new program that's where they're going to be embedded in high stress like security forces. They have embedded resiliency. True North, I believe, was the program. But you have these programs that come up, and then they don't get funded and they fail. And then they come up and then they don't get funded and they fail. Like, we need to just fund the things that matter or they don't matter.
You see this in society a lot, where a problem will happen. We come up with the solution for that one thing. It's like whack-a-mole. Instead of doing a root cause analysis, going, hey, how did we end up here? And then trying to attack the problem from there.
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head, man, is that it's an education thing. Whether that education happens at school or whether that education happens at home, we can debate that, right? That's the how.
Right.
I would argue, though, and you touched on this a little bit with what you said earlier, is that the 4-day work week thing, so that parents can teach their kids. Because a lot of this is parents are just working too much to be able to provide that to their children. And the people who aren't largely have a stay-at-home parent somewhere who can do that, who is doing that. But that's just not the reality for a lot of us. I didn't grow up in a place where, both of my parents could stay at home, and you didn't either, right?
Yep.
Now, we were lucky enough to make it out of our situation, but I would argue, I don't know your life, but I would assume that there were people around where you grew up who didn't make it. And there are a lot of people who grew up in my neighborhood who are right where they were, So the question is, how do we create that situation for our youth to be able to continue to make our country as good as we believe it is? And I think it all starts with education, man. I think if we lose the education fight, we lose everything else.
Yeah, I agree. There's very few like concrete things that you can say like everybody's entitled to it and it happens. The levels of education that people receive in this country are widely different and vary based on opportunity or location. But you still go to school. There's very few people that actually don't go to school. K through 12. Some drop out early, but most people start because it's a public school system and they'll go through. So I guess that's my argument for why it starts in the school system. Because like I can't say that every parent is going to have a partner, and I can't say that every parent is getting, even if we went to a 4-day work week, gig economy, they're going to keep working. Like I can't control that. If I were an entity that was pressing a red button, like, oh, I'm the overseer of this, I'm going to make a rule. I can't control those things. But if I'm controlling this experiment, the one control element that stays consistent is there is an education. So if I'm going to embed something somewhere, I'm going to do it in the education system in order to ensure that each kid has to go through it so they get a baseline. I guess that would be my argument for it going in school.
You know, if you look at our history, it used to be that teachers used to travel, right? They'd live in your home back in the colonial days of America.
Yeah.
Right? But that's how valuable they were, is that you would keep them in your own house. What public education has allowed us to do is it has allowed us to centralize resources to be able to provide that service to lots of kids, right? So that one teacher isn't traveling from house to house, that one teacher is teaching 20 kids at once.
Right.
And there's a lot of benefit to that. But I think without a vision, without a clear vision of what you want that to look like, I think it's a mess. And that's how you get standardized tests, and that's how you get your SATs, your ACTs. Hey, this is your pathway to college. A good college, you got to get a really good score on this test. So what am I going to do? I'm going to teach you the test.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to teach you how to be a contributing member of society. I'm not going to teach you how to make sure to keep yourself out of trouble financially. I'm not going to teach you how to take care of yourself when you're living on your own and your mom's not cooking your meals anymore.
Yep.
All of these things are really important, not just for how you operate, but even your long-term health. You know, I come from a family of a lot of people who end up getting diabetes, and it really just boils down to just too much glucose, man, over years and years and years of consuming too much glucose. And that education of, oh, let me not eat fast food just because it's easy. Sometimes it's cheaper too.
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
Let me not do that. Let me focus on making sure I get some fresh ingredients, some vegetables and things like that. Is really, really important and not emphasized enough as to what the long-term effects could be.
Yeah, that would be the home ec piece. Right? Like
100%.
And there's another argument, obviously, for like, oh, well, if you're inner city, it's impossible to get the fresh foods because due to gentrification, they're all on the outskirts and they're super high priced items. Like, I know that that's another argument to this, but at its core, education and awareness helps. I remember sex education was a part of curriculum. I don't know if that exists anymore or not, right?
Yeah.
Kid's not there yet for me to know if it exists there. But I remember sitting in that classroom during the sex ed portion, and they were showing the awful clips because they want to show you the worst ones of like the herpes and the clap and like all these things. And they were talking about which ones are curable, which is not. They went over the percentages. And I remember, maybe not a lot of people did this, but I remember making a decision in my mind there. I was like, and body count's just the name that kids use nowadays, but I was like, my body count's gonna be low. Like I just remember thinking like, I'm not gonna have a lot of one night stands because I don't want that to be me.
Yeah.
But that was awareness, right? If porn was all that drove my thinking about what this was, it's all unicorns and rainbows. There's never a downside to this. Yeah. So if you don't learn about something, if you're not offered the exposure or the education, then you don't have a chance to make a decision, an informed decision. So we're giving children an opportunity to make an informed decision on things like their health. Mm-hmm. And then that gives them a chance to go home with a brochure or, hey, how was school today? And you're like, oh, we learned about diabetes. And you're like, did you know that that's, that runs in our family? And then this is like, now you can talk about it. It's wild. Yeah, it has to exist somewhere. That awareness and education has to exist somewhere for these topics. And yes, it'd be great if it always be in the home, but sometimes too, at least since we're on the topic of kids, like your peer group is going to be your greatest educator or teacher. And you might not listen to your parents. You might not believe it. You're faced with immortality, like everything. I am youthful. I'm always going to be young. And so hearing it from somebody else other than your parents always helps a little bit. It helps reinforce, if anything, the truth.
So we talked about education and how we need to integrate that more with life skills. For me, I look at this as a community problem. And I think a lot of this is just us owning what the future is going to look like by reshaping it in our minds as a responsibility that we all kind of have to carry. And I don't feel like we do that right now.
Yeah, I agree. For whatever what pops in my head kind of goes back to like our previous conversation topics. Like I don't know when common courtesy went out the window. I'll use that as my example.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, we have a responsibility to the future in the sense that like anything that we can do, we should do to try and make it better for what the future is. The future is changing so much, like from where with AI and where we were to where we are now. Like it's going to look, I don't know what we can really do besides take care of people. Because like, you're still going to be you. You're not going to be part robot. We're not quite there yet, right? So like if you were you, but you were 12, you in 20 years, you're still not going to be part robot. You're just going to be a part of a world where robots and information just are like so much more around. Like you have access to all of those things, but you still have a heart. You still have pumping blood. You still have a brain. You still have a profound sense of wrong and right. Like, so if there's anything we can do, we're taking care of people. When I walked into the store, this is really what started this the other day. I always hold the door for people, right? Like even if there's that awkward, like from here to, I don't know, 50 meters, and you're like, I could shut the door at this point, but there's that sense that you're like, man, I'd feel like a bit of a prick to shut the door. Mm-hmm. So you hold the door open for them. And that might be the chain reaction for that person, and then pick up a coat that someone drops, or maybe they drop a $50 bill. They might give it back instead of keep it. Like good usually continues to create good. Like that good behavior. That's what we should be working on. So like, hold the door for people like that. It should be that simple. Mm-hmm. I'm so tired. I had it shut in my face. I watched a girl hold the door for another woman, and then I was maybe 2 paces behind her. And then the woman that just held the door for, like, she had the door held for her. She shut the door in my face. And I was just like, when you know I was there, and if you didn't know I was there, that's wrong on you. Like, where were your peripherals at? Are we not paying attention to other people? We're so focused internally that we're not even caring about where everybody else is in this space at this moment. Like, hold the door for someone, pick something up for them if they drop, smile at them when they walk by, not like the awkward thing, but if you lock eyes with someone to do this, like, oh, pick up my phone real quick, like that's awkward. Just a smile and a wave instead of the hi, and then they keep on walking. Like, there's a time to talk now, and I get it. Everybody's busy. I'm not trying to make everybody like a Southerner where we stop and have 25-minute conversations on the way to the gas station. But the common decency, the level of common decency, I feel in the last 10 years has degraded to a point where it is detrimental to the future because we're not taking care of the person, the stranger, the one we don't have to take care of. We're not doing the common basic elements of what is human decency. We need to do those things again, and we might go somewhere in the future.
This leads me to probably one of the most important questions. When you are trying to cross the street and a car stops for you when they didn't have to, do you walk? Do you do a little bit of a jog?
I hurry across the street and I wave.
Oh,
I feel very strongly about
you put
this.
Up the hand to acknowledge
Correct.
What they did.
Even if it's a crosswalk where I have the right of way, it is that person made a conscious decision to let you go. In a lot of respects, that is like a rolling of the red carpet. Like it's I am making a decision. I'm sitting in my tank of a vehicle that could crush you, and I decided you have the right of way. You owe them something, and I don't mean that in a transactional sense, but you owe them common decency. Hustle across the road, and if you can't hustle because maybe you're limited in some capacity, then put up a hand to say thank you. That's all. A thank you.
Just acknowledge. Correct. Just acknowledge that I stopped for you.
Yep. It's a huge pet
peeve. Yeah. The law may dictate that I stop for you, but I don't really have to stop for you, right?
Right.
Like, so I am a proponent of that as well. I do meet other people though who go, I'm not going to jog because walking, it's about the same time. Like, why would I do that? And I'm like, it's not about the speed at which you cross the street. That still is internally focused, right? You're still looking at just you, how you exist by yourself. I'm not getting across the street any faster if I do a little bit of a jog or I walk. I go, no, it's not about that. It's about acknowledging. It's about acknowledging that person didn't kill you,
Yep.
or didn't attempt to kill you.
Where are you on the shopping cart discussion?
Which part of it?
Where you take your shopping cart right to your car, and let's say it's 10 p.m. There's not that many people around. It's not rush hour where you're going to be seen.
Yeah.
Do you leave it in the vacant spot next to you, or do you take it all the way back and put it where it's supposed to go?
So I take it and I put it in the those areas where you can put the carts. Mm-hmm. It's like a little rack for the carts.
Yeah, in a location meant for shopping cart return.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, most large places where it would be a huge inconvenience will have those.
You're right.
Right? So if I'm like at like a farmer's market and they don't have those, I will take it back. Right? Because the whole thing is what I don't want is someone can't park in the spot because the thing rolls, or it rolls into somebody's car and it dings it because I didn't want to take the 2 minutes to take the thing back.
Yes. And that is like a litmus test for common decency, right? Like, you don't have to. No one's going to see you. Just doing the right thing when no one's watching. Like, there's a lot of ways this thing could spill. What if it starts raining and somebody needed a cart, but because everybody did that person that wanted a cart, they made their way up to the front and there were no carts available now because they're all scattered throughout the back of the parking lot. Nobody put them where they were supposed to go. Like, you really think that, not you, but the people that would do this, that your 4 seconds of getting in your car right now is more important than the inconvenience that is going to be collected by someone else. Mm-hmm. That's terrible thinking. That's where we are. That's where we've gotten. I don't know if it was COVID. I think COVID accelerated it. I think we were already headed down that direction. But internal, inward thinking feels to be like more prevalent nowadays.
Seat down or seat up?
In what?
Toilet.
Oh, seat down. I will throw my paper towels when I wash, and I prefer paper towels to the hand dryer when I go to the gym. I'll try and shoot them like a basketball into the trash can. If I miss, I will. I've done this before. I've taken a step like I'm going to go to the door, like, oh, it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I will feel this overwhelming sense of like, someone else is going to have to pick that up. And I'll go pick it up. Like, that's not an altruistic thing. It's just like there is something that drives people to want to people better. Like, we should all have that. Like, you're causing an inconvenience for someone else. So don't do that. Control what you can control, and you can control not making this someone else's problem. If you do that, then everybody's a little bit better, I guess. So yes, the seat will always come back down, but that's because it's how it's designed. This
is where I diverge from you. Unpopular opinion. I know I'm going to get some hate. I'm going to get some hate from this, but I actually leave it up. I'm going to tell you why. Okay. I don't know who's coming to the toilet next. So leaving it up may be a courtesy to myself later on, right? Now, if I need to sit on it, I do the motion that I would have done anyways to put it back down. Now, if there's somebody else coming in after me, I also think that that is a reasonable thing to do. If I have to lift it up to use the bathroom, then someone can pull it down to use the bathroom. That is my philosophy on that. Why do
you lift it up anyways? Why don't you just pee in between and just leave it down?
You know why? Because it's splatter.
Okay.
It's a splatter thing.
Okay.
Right? In the off chance that something splatters and I don't see it, I don't want someone to sit on it.
Fair.
So there's a consideration there just in lifting the seat up in the first place.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a reason. Like, at the end of the day, you're not like, screw other people. This is about me. You're at least thinking through what makes sense to you.
Yeah.
I'll take that, right?
Yeah.
Like, differing of opinions slightly, but your thing makes sense.
Yeah, it's still thoughtful.
Correct. You still reflected on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, it's still thoughtful.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of these. Like the toilet paper argument is where I draw the line. Like I know that's always used between like spouses.
You're talking about over under?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've heard 2 arguments on this as well. And I actually heard an argument that makes sense for under. Okay. I'm an over person. I think I've always been like, dude, weird to put it under. But then somebody was like, well, if you had pets or if you had children living in your house, then you might think about it differently. Because if I go and I touch it like this and it's under, it just spins around and no toilet paper goes down.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm still wondering why anybody's petting the wheel of toilet paper instead of pulling.
Kids do weird things. Pets do even weirder things.
Pets do weird things. Yeah.
Right? But if you think about it, right? If you do this, the toilet paper just kind of stays where it is.
That's true.
If it's over, which is what feels right to me, right? Naturally, it feels right to me. And someone were to do that, you'd have toilet paper everywhere.
Yeah.
So I go, I'll accept that.
We thought it through. Like, I guess this also, like, that's only going to take place really in your home. But, like, if my wife had told me, like, it's got to be over and this is why, then easy. Like, I'm not rearranging the aura that is me to help get that across finish line. Like, I'll just put it over every time then. Fine. Yeah. That works.
Are you an under guy?
I don't look at it either way. I never, like, neither of us care. I've always seen the comedy skits and the shows and stuff that like reference the over under.
Yeah.
And I've never, because I pull. If it's over, I pull. And if it's under, I pull. You
grab the last sheet.
You pull.
And you pull.
Yeah. You don't play with it. It's not a cat toy. You're just going to pull, right? And then you rip it and that's it. You move on.
I think you just made a pretty strong case for under.
Did I?
Yeah. Because if no matter what you pull,
right,
then with over, you leave yourself susceptible to pets and kids. Mm-hmm. With under, you really don't.
Yeah. So
you might actually be...
I might be an under person.
An under guy.
Yeah. I'll get the shirt.
And I secretly hate you.
No, we have found our impasse. This is where the roads and the woods
right here.
This
is the place right here. We could talk about everything else, but there's no room for discourse.
Right. It's fundamental differences.
Yeah. Yeah. That's funny. I've had a great time talking with you. Hopefully we can do this again. Obviously I'm deploying here in a bit, so I'm not going to be able to do this in a sit-down form, at least in this nice of a setting. Yeah. It may be like folding chairs in the future, so we'll see.
It'll still be entertaining.
Man, I really appreciate you taking the time. And dude, it's been insightful.
Thanks. I've appreciated the questions, the opportunity to just talk, right? You gave me the space to talk. So, and kind of tell, I guess, some of my story anyways. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries, man. Like I said, let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it.
And for everybody watching, thanks for joining in again. We'll see you next time.